Today we're going to be talking about how to use the animation features in Procreate. Since we've already started and we know the basics, I'm going to focus on just the animation aspects of it today. You want to make sure that your blank canvas is at least 3000 by 3000 pixels and DPI of 300. You can crop it to whatever size you want, but this is the size I have it at. Then you want to click on your wrench, you want to go to Actions, and you want to toggle on Animation Assist, which is the first option there that you see below Crop and Resize. And as you can see, when you select that and you toggle it on, there is a timeline that appears at the bottom of our screen. And in our timeline, we have a play option. And once you click play, you can also pause. That's so you can see your progress on your animation and how it's coming along. We have settings, which we'll talk about, and we have add frame. So when I'm clicking on add frame, you can see I'm creating blank layers essentially. And when you click on those individual frames, it has additional settings within it. Now, if we open our Layers tab on the top right, which we learned about in our last unit, you can see that each frame that I've created correlate to a frame in our layers. So each frame essentially is just the equivalent to a layer, with the first one being the one at the very bottom closest to the background color, and then the most recent one being the top one. And you can think about this as pretty much just playing all of your layers from start to finish. And now I want to talk a little bit about our settings tab. So first in our settings, we have our play settings. So loop will pretty much play your animation in a loop from start to finish over and over and over again. Ping pong plays your animation in a loop as well, except it will start and then it'll go to the end and it'll bounce back from end to start. So it'll go start, end, end, start, end, start, back and forth. And one shot pretty much will just play your animation once and it won't be looping it when you click play. Next, we have frames per second, which is exactly as it sounds, how many frames you want within a second of playtime. So if you lower that number, it's going to be a very choppy animation, it's going to be slower, it's going to be a little more sporadic, whereas if you increase it, so in Procreate you can go up to 60 frames, it's going to be a lot faster, it's going to be a lot smoother, but it does depend on how you have drawn out your animation. If we have an animation where someone's arms are at their sides and then all the way above their head in the next frame, it's still going to be choppy even if you're putting it at max frames. So you want to make sure you're drawing those in between frames unless you're going for the choppy look. Next we have onion skin frames, and here this slider allows you to select how many you want to be able to see at a certain time. So pretty much if I have it set to 2 onion skin frames, I'm only going to be seeing 2 iterations of my frames before the one that I'm currently working on. Onion skins are pretty much a less opaque, more see-through version of your previous frames so that you can see what kind of changes you're making and reference how far away or how much space you need to move to create those in-between frames for your animation. So here I drew a circle for my first frame, and then for my second frame, I'm drawing another circle, and you can see that that last frame turns less opaque. And it's red because I set it to red, but you can change that later. And then I'm going to draw another circle, and once I go to the next frame, you'll see now that that first frame disappears because I only want to see 2 onion skin frames at a time. And this is going to be personal preference, so you can mess around with it and see what works best for you. Some people might get overwhelmed with too many onion skin frames. I know I do. Or some people prefer it that way. So you can choose as little or as many as you want, but I do recommend having at least 1 just so you know where you are drawing and what you are trying to achieve. Otherwise, you're kind of just drawing blindly, and that might make things more difficult for you. So here you can see me continuing to draw my circles in my frames. I filled out all 5 of my frames at this point. We can use the slider to mess around with how many onion frames I want on my screen, and you can see that it's increasing as I'm raising the number. And when I lower the number, you can see that it goes back down. Our next setting is going to mess with the onion skin opacity. So this also comes down to personal preference. Because we want to be able to see our onion skins underneath our current frame as a reference, we want to make sure it's at least 1%. Personally, I would say just whatever is most comfortable for you, whatever you can see best, whatever isn't going to distract you from your current frame. And then you can also go down and change the color of your onion frame. So you can make it black, you can make it red, purple, pink, blue, whatever color you need it to be. So here I'm just going to be filling in the rest of my circles, and you want to make sure that you don't have any line art that has gaps in it if you're going to be filling with the paint bucket tool. Remember, if there's any gap at all, it's going to fill your whole screen like it did for mine. So make sure all your lines are complete if you're going to be using the paint bucket tool. Now that we have everything colored in, we can go to our frame options, and you open that by clicking on one of the frames at the bottom of your screen in your timeline. And if you click on the button duplicate, it duplicates whatever frame you have open. And if you click on the frame again and you click delete, it will delete whatever frame you've clicked on. Now that we have everything colored, we can click play and we can see what our animation looks like. And then once you see what it looks like, this is at the frame rate that it's set at this current time. When you click on settings again, you can mess around with the frames per second. So if I wanted to do it at 3 frames per second, this is what it would look like. And as I said before, it's very slow, it's very choppy. If you bring it up to max, which is 60 in Procreate, it is very, very fast. It's very, very, very smooth. And it would be even smoother if I had included more than 5 frames, but for our demo purposes, I did not. So you can settle on whatever frame rate is comfortable for you, whatever looks best for your vision, for your final project. You can always change it later, so don't worry. Next, if you go back to frame options by clicking on one of the frames, you can change the duration that a frame gets held. So here we can hold it for 2 frames. And that pretty much creates 2 frames behind that original frame. It creates a pause. Like there's a pause in your animation, and the longer you set it to, the longer the pause will be, as you can see here. So not all of us are going to need to use this in our animation, but if you want that for your animation, this is a great tool for you. Now we can talk about what happens when you want to move a frame around. You can click Add Frame, and as you can see, you can hold down on that frame and drag it across your timeline wherever you want it to go. So for us, I want to put this at the very beginning because I want to talk about backgrounds and foregrounds. When you click on the frame that is at the very, very beginning of your animation, and only at the beginning, it will give you an option to create background, and you can toggle that on. As you can see on the bottom of the screen there, I'm making our animation for this demo have a yellow background. So now that that's toggled on and now that it's yellow, if I click play for the animation, you can see that our red ball is now bouncing on a yellow background for the entirety of the animation. And you can certainly be as creative as you want for this. So an example I can give is maybe you want your background to be a forest scene, and then you want your foreground, which is what's going to be at the very front of your animation that will not change or move, could be, let's say, some vines or some leaves hanging down. So when you put a frame at the very end of your animation, at the end of all the frames, you can draw on top of it whatever you want, and then you click on it and you toggle foreground. Once again, it has to be the very last frame. It will create an image at the very end of your animation that will not move. So you can also move this around with your select tool, like we learned about in our last unit. And then when you click play, you have the yellow background and you have the blue heart that's at the front that will never move, while your animation, the frames in between, do move. So the next bit of information I want to give you guys is if you create a new layer in your layers tab like we talked about in our last unit, you can hover it over your frame and create a group, which we should be familiar with. And you can orient that layer within that group. So if you want to create a smiley face for this circle, you would put the layer on top of the red circle so that you can still see the face. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going to add a smiley face group on top of every red circle layer, and I could have certainly made it so that maybe the smiley face goes from a closed mouth smile to a open mouth smile. So you can animate incrementally with it so that each layer within that group is a part of that frame. And if I were to include maybe another ball or another character or something moving in the background, I would want to incorporate that image in each of these frames, in each of these layer groups. You want to make sure that you're doing it incrementally along with each frame so that there is no choppiness and so that everything moves cohesively. So now that our animation is done, you want to open up your settings and make sure that you have everything the way you want it. So if you want your animation to be ping-ponging and repeating in a loop, kind of like a GIF, you want to set it to ping pong. Or if it's just all going to be in one shot, it's long enough, it has enough time and duration in it, then just do one shot. Next, you want to click on your wrench on the top left for actions, click on animated or share, and then click on animated MP4. And on this screen, you want to make sure it's set to max resolution, and you can mess around with the frames per second before you export it. So here you just find your middle ground, whatever looks best to you, click export. This screen pops up, click save video. Next, we're going to open iMovie. You're going to click create new movie. Then you're going to select your exported animation and you're going to click create. It's going to bring you into the timeline to edit your video so that you can make it a looped animation. And this specifically is for those of us that want to make a looped animation because ours is too short to be just a one shot. So then you want to click on the animation in your timeline in the middle there, and then you want to click on the magnifying glass with the plus on the top right, and you want to pinch to zoom it out. Once you've done that, you can click on your animation clip again, and on the bottom it says duplicate. You can duplicate your animation as many times as you want so that we can get to however long you want it to be. But here first, we want to make sure that we get rid of this transition that's fading it in between the first and second clip. We don't want that, so you can click on it and select none. After that, you're going to have two clips back to back of the same exact exported animation. So you want to make sure that you shorten those clips a little bit, especially if you use the foreground feature, because for some reason it creates a black screen otherwise. But all you have to do is select the ends of those clips and shorten it a little bit, and then as you can see now, we don't have that black screen anymore. Then you want to click on your animation clip and you want to duplicate it as many times as you can until you get to however much time you want your animation to loop. So for me, I wanted it to be 5 seconds, so mine ended up at 5.3 seconds. And here you can see my animation looping back and forth ping-ponging as we intended. Finally, we're going to click done on the top left corner, go down to the middle bottom of our screen, click share video, and then this screen pops up, click save video. Once it's saved, you can go to your photo library, find your video, click edit. Then you want to click crop and crop out those black sides so that it's just your animation canvas visible. Click done. And then there you have it. You have your very first animation ready to submit on our Google Classroom.